Hello and welcome. The tide is going out. This is Morro Bay, California. And if you have ever been here, you will know that the boats all turn the same direction when the tide is going out. And then when the tide comes back in later on today, all the boats will turn around and align themselves up the other direction. Now, I had this topic a few days ago in another context in which I believe I said something like everything just keeps moving and keeps going. And one of the things that, the reason that I'm talking about the tide going in and the tide going out, I think it needs to be talked about again. And this was the inspiration for me today to have this conversation, because the tide at the moment is going out. But later on today, the tide is going to come back in. Now, what's also interesting about this particular metaphor is that I have been out on kayaks on Morro Bay when the tide is going out, and have gotten myself down to the other end of the bay, and it got to be really rough. So if you look way down there to the other end by the rock, I have actually gone from behind me on a kayak and rowed down the bay here when the tide is going out. And it was so simple and easy to flow with the tide going out. But then I wanted to come back before the tide actually started to turn around to help me. And that's when I got into trouble, because what happens is the fact that far down at the other end of the bay down here, the water starts to really rush, and it gets hard to, if I turn around down there, it is really flowing, and I am pushing up against the current. Now, isn't that interesting in terms of what that means for in my life or in your life? When am I pushing up against the grain? When am I pushing up against the current? Well, you know, quite frankly, I've done that a lot in my life. And I know that if you're watching this channel, you probably have done the exact same thing. And isn't it always much easier to flow with the tide? Maybe it may be a good idea to wait down at the other end of the bay for the tide to switch around and then flow back with it instead of fighting the current the entire time on the way back. Now, I had a schedule, don't you know? I had a schedule. I didn't want to pay another $20 for another hour on the kayak. So I was bound to determine that I was going to row back to the dock where I rented the kayak and just work it and work it and work it and work it and work it. Whereas maybe I could have done something different, like parked the kayak down at the other end where the tide was going out and stopped for a lunch and grabbed the lunch and then rowed back when the tide was coming back in, and it would have been so simple. I am so adoring this metaphor this morning. It's just, I am just loving this metaphor this morning. Now, granted, it takes a long time for the tide to turn around, and I don't have that kind of time. So sometimes, we do have to work really hard and against the tide, and it does come to fruition. However, aren't there a lot of times when we do that and we don't need to? I certainly know that's true for myself. The other thing I want to talk about today is just simply the beauty of all of this. It really, none of it really matters. I can fight as much as I want. I can fight the tide as much as I want. But those sailboats out there, those sailboats that pay anchorage out there in Morro Bay, they're going to go one direction when the tide is one way, and then they're going to flip 180 degrees, and it's really cool to watch when that actually happens. And they're going to face the other direction and go with the flow of the tide coming back. Wouldn't it be interesting if life was so situated, if we did that all the time? I know that there was a time when humans did that. Probably not so much anymore. As you can see through the windows of my car, there's a beautiful ocean view behind me. I have moved up to Moonstone Beach in Cambria, California. To finish out my point about that this is a beautiful world. Now, it's all fine and dandy for me to point that out when I'm sitting in what would be considered one of the most beautiful parts of the world, the Central Coast of California. It is world-renowned, driving California 1 from San Luis Obispo up to Monterey Peninsula. There's nothing but stunning, beautiful vistas and wonderful weather and lovely people. What's not to love? So in a certain context, this type of video where I'm talking about two things, both of which are quite beautiful, the ebb and flow of the tide and the most beautiful world that we definitely live in. And I know it doesn't always look beautiful. And I don't always think it looks beautiful. And I know we need to do a much better job than what we're doing in taking care of it. It may not even be possible. And it's clearly very overwhelming. But yet at the same time, this is the moment that we're in. Whenever you're watching this, and this is the moment that I was in when I was making this. It happens to be recorded on October 30th, 2020 on a Friday afternoon about 5:20 in the Pacific time zone. So I like to do that because it brings us to the moment. I had a conversation the other day with a friend of mine who was very anticipatory about a very significant and special and stressful event that was about to occur. And I just said, come back to the moment. Come back to the moment. It's all we ever have. It's one moment after the next, making a decision. The tide goes in, the tide goes out. The world around us is beautiful. Unfortunately, there are lots of reasons behind why we don't see that. And I certainly have had my share in my life. But I've only got this moment, and you only have this moment. And the more that we work on that, I tell you, the more we will be at peace. If there's one thing that COVID has taught me, is the present moment, in a way that a lot of things really never had. And an appreciation for all moments, for all time. This beach here has been here a lot longer than I will ever be. This beach is very special to me because my mother and I spent Thanksgiving afternoon here in 2009. And for that, I actually came here today for a bit of homage to her. There's really nothing less for me to say today. I think all of the points that I've talked about are very valuable in a life practice. Living in the present moment, appreciating the beauty around you, and that the tide goes in and the tide goes out. And the less amount of time that we fight the current of that tide, the better off we are. So with that, I'm going to leave you for this evening. In about 45 minutes, I'm going to watch a beautiful, beautiful sunset. And I feel very honored and privileged to be here tonight. I also feel very honored and privileged to share these videos with you. Thank you so much for listening. Merci beaucoup. Bonsoir.